In some cases, not in all cases, once a person gets settled into their new church, after all the newness has died down, many people begin, but again, this does not apply to everybody, so don't get me wrong, many people will begin to become a little uneasy in the church. And if that's so, why is that? What's happening? Well, you might begin to notice things that are very unusual. There are political things happening in some churches, not all of them, but in some churches there's political things happening that you may never have noticed before when you first got there. I'm not talking to everybody here. I'm only talking to people that may find themselves in a similar situation to this. You find some backbitings, some talebearers. Look, I'm not trying to be the prophet of doom here, but if we're being honest, there's something, because there's flesh in churches. And this is what we're talking about. This is what we're addressing, that a lot of people in church don't even want to talk about. I'm going to talk about it in this book. Backbitings, talebearers, whisperers, betrayals from your fellow Christians, and even, God forbid, from the pastor himself. And if so, again, if so, as it actually happens in some places that you may not even be aware of, you were thinking that that pastor was a man of God, ordained by God, incapable of deceit, incapable of corruption and betrayal, and you might begin to say to yourself, and he goes and he commits this folly. Now let's take a break real quick, read another explanatory note before we go too far in here. This explanatory note is called, and he goes and commits this folly. Now, I really hope that by now I have not lost my audience. That is, in believing that I'm going into a direction that I'm really not. It may seem from my wording that I'm against pastors, I'm against churches, but that's not the case at all. As I explained in my introduction, which I have added in because I wanted to detour any wrong thoughts concerning this book before even beginning the journey of it. In fact, one of my own mentors years ago, back in the mid to late 1990s, whom I thought was really dead set against anybody being a pastor, since he seemed to hound on them every time he got up and preached. It sounded pretty negative at times, I got to be honest. He told me just a few days before he passed on, he was sick in a hospital bed at this time, that he predicted that old so-and-so would become a pastor themselves. And I told him, but brother, you are against pastors. How can you make that prediction? Who said that I'm against pastors? He asked me. He had a grimace on his face when he said it. Well, I told him, I gathered that from your words. Ted, he said to me, I have never been against pastors. It's dictators that I'm against. God ordained for there to be pastors. That's what he said. That saying has stuck with me until this very day, and it said a lot to me. By the way, that prediction of his did come true. I too am in agreement that pastors are very much needed, as well as the leadership of the other 4 offices also. And as will be seen in the upcoming chapters of this book, I do support a 5-fold ministry. Even though there are other callings and offices of the ministry, those 5 represent the leadership positions of the church. There's no way to get around it. But only if they are conducted in the way that God had intended for those offices to work. And that's without, as my old mentor had told me, without being a dictator. A pastor, my friends, should be a loving, kind-hearted parent who's interested in allowing and helping a child to grow up to become mature themselves. Even in nature, a mother bird will sometimes kick her babies out of the nest if they're staying in too long, so that they can learn to fly on their own, because the baby simply needs to learn how to gather and find food for their own survival. Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. So if it's unnatural for any kind of a parent to hold back a child, why is it healthy for a spiritual parent to hold back God's kids? It's not only unnatural, it's unethical, it is wrong, and it's anti-biblical. Now, please take note that most of my statements in this present chapter, chapter 2, and indeed this will carry on to chapter 3, they're directed toward ministers who are holding people back from growing to their full intended potentials, from both prematurely ordained novices and also, more especially though, from actual dictators. But I'm not meaning properly called pastors who are working within their gifts correctly. For I know for a fact that there are good pastors and ministers out there, even if they may seem to be the minority sometimes of the ministering groups. All right, let's go back to the main part of the book. So anyways, let me reread this last sentence. You know, some backbinds, talebearers, whisperers, betrayals from fellow Christians, and even, God forbid, from the pastor himself. And if this is so, if, as it actually happens in some places that a lot of people are not aware of, you were thinking that that pastor was a man of God, ordained of God, incapable of deceit, corruption, or betrayal, and you say to yourself, and he goes and commits this folly, you realize, big revelation here, you realize he was human after all, just like yourself. And surely he can make mistakes too. Come on, let's be real about this. So what do you do now? You found out, like I said, that your pastor was human after all, and he may have hurt you in some way or another. Some people, upon seeing such things, they either quit church altogether. I've seen that happen. They join another church. I've seen that happen. Or they start a church of their own self, their own church, sometimes in the same faith and belief, or even start another denomination. And by doing so, they might just yet add another name to the earth.